It's just exploded on my screen.
We have the pleasure today of welcoming Maître David Heurtel, who's going to be speaking to us on immigration, diversity, and inclusiveness. David Heurtel is counsel at Fasken. He advises clients on a wide range of issues, including government and public relations, environment, energy, and climate change, ESG, and immigration. He was a member of the Quebec National Assembly, representing the provincial riding of Viau from 2013 to 2018, serving in Quebec's Liberal government in major roles as Minister for Sustainable Development, the Environment, and the Fight Against Climate Change from 2014 to 2017, and as member of Immigration, Diversity, and Inclusiveness from 2017 to 2018. Before entering politics, David was CEO of Montreal's Olympic Park from 2011 to 2013. He's an adjunct professor at Concordia University in the Masters in Public Policy and Public Administration program, and a political analyst on CBC News Network's Power and Politics, CJD 800 AM Montreal, and CTV News. He serves on several boards, most notably as chair of the Réseau du Sport Étudiant du Québec, RSEQ, and of l'École de la Relève. David, welcome, and thank you for joining us. The screen is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Susan, and it's a great pleasure to join all of you today. I first want to tell you how much I respect and admire the work you do. And so I think, first of all, we all owe you a great debt of gratitude for the fantastic work Rotarians do and the Rotary Club of Westmount does. And so I wanted to start off with that note. When we exchanged emails about the topic, I mean, immigration, diversity, and inclusiveness is very vast. I think we could talk about this for several hours and still not cover everything. So I hope we can narrow things down in the question part of the exchange. Obviously, starting a talk on immigration without talking about Ukraine is a bit impossible for me. Ever since the invasion, I've been working, and a lot of members of my firm have been working on ways to facilitate the coming of refugees to Canada. We're doing this, of course, with no thought of a business angle, of giving any type of business angle to it. We're just trying to do our parts in facilitating and working with the federal government and the provincial government and the Ukrainian community in trying to facilitate and help out, because over the next few weeks, unfortunately, we're facing a massive humanitarian crisis. Already, we're at over 2 million refugees at this point and counting. And so Canada will definitely be doing its part. And right now we're collectively trying to set up the way to welcome these Ukrainians. So obviously Montreal is going to be a key destination, and definitely will be continuing to work on that and following it very closely. So that said, in terms of immigration, maybe what I could start off with is a few general remarks and say that for me, we're at a point where regardless where some people in Quebec feel that immigration is a problem, I come out and have always been very clear on my position. I feel that immigration is a solution and is not a problem. And if you look at the history of both Quebec and Canada, of course, it's built on immigration. It is still being built on immigration. And what is critical, I think, in any discussion about immigration and looking forward to debates on immigration here in Quebec is the fact that immigration is essential to the future development in Quebec. And let me say what I'm talking about. The fact is that demographically, Quebec is one of the oldest provinces in the country, one of the oldest provinces in North America, state in North America. And we are shrinking. I mean, if you followed the news, just last week, there was an issue in the House of Commons about the new electoral map. And the fact is that Quebec was scheduled to lose 1 seat because of its population rate is not growing fast enough compared to the rest of the country. Now, that was stopped for political reasons, but the fact is that both our political weight in the Canadian Federation has been in decline for decades. And the fact is that not only demographically we have a challenge, but economically we're continuing to grow. Today, March 9th, 2022, there are over 200,000 jobs that are open in Quebec. And if you look at those jobs, they're pretty much in every sector of the economy. We tend to think, and last week I was guest hosting on CJAD. I was filling in for Aaron Wren and Natasha Hall on the afternoon show in Montreal Now. And I had a caller calling in and say, "Oh, we don't need more DoorDash drivers." And the fact is that we're dealing sometimes with this stereotype that immigration and immigrants are coming in to fill small or menial service jobs. That's not the fact. The fact is that you can look at any sector, going from teaching to all the fields in healthcare, all of them, going from doctors to people that help, to nurses, to préposés aux bénéficiaires, to all of those jobs, going all the way down to, of course, the service jobs, the service sector. But also you can look at our agriculture sector, which is, and all the food transformation sector, which is going through huge challenges right now. And strategically, those are problems. It's affecting our economic growth. And it has also a direct link to the inflation we're going through. The causes of the inflation that is going on, not only here in Quebec, but across the country and across the world, has 3 main causes. One, of course, is the pandemic and the impact on the supply chain that the pandemic had. But the fact is also there was the money, the government programs that put enormous amounts of cash into the economy. And finally, the fact is the fact that there's not enough people to fill those jobs. And as the pandemic is slowing down and the economies of Quebec, Canada, and across the world are gearing up, well, there's just nobody to fill those positions. And you also have to look right now and in the next few years, and we're starting to see it with what has been called the Great Resignation. The fact is that older generations have decided with the pandemic to leave their jobs or to significantly reduce their workload. And this is also a new phenomenon that will also impact not just inflation, but the labor shortage in Quebec. So that puts us in a situation where we have a challenge. And while immigration is not the only solution, it is one of these solutions, and it cannot be ignored in any way. Independent studies have shown that at least 20%, if not more, of these jobs are going to have to be filled by immigration. Now, there are other strategies. There's automation, artificial intelligence. Technology can help But again, that's not automatic, and that's over the next few years. And it's not for every job, obviously. The other strategy is also trying to bring back into the workforce people that have retired. Now, there have been some efforts, the Quebec government, the federal government are trying and are starting to develop strategies, but the problem right now is that there's, even though there are some financial incentives, for example, what the Quebec government has started putting forward to bring back retirees into the workforce, the problem is that right now, the way the tax system is built up with the pensions and the RRSPs and everything else, actually, right now, even with the financial incentives, a lot of retirees are finding out when they talk to their accountant that they would end up losing money if they would actually go back into the workforce. So you have these weird situations right now. So that's not quite working the way the governments are hoping it's going to work. And the other great piece of the strategy is training, trying to retrain or to train differently the existing workforce to go towards the jobs that are available. That can also help, but definitely still is not going to be the silver bullet that we're looking for. Also very important to point out that this labor shortage is not concentrated in Montreal. This is in every single region of Quebec. You have places like Val d'Or. I mean, in Abitibi-Témiscamingue, the mining sector, they're at a point where if you have no experience in mining, they will fly you in, give you a place to live, start you off at $80,000 a year, and train you, even if you've never even worked in the mining sector. And so this is getting to a point where if we don't address it seriously, this will affect our capacity, our financial capacity, to maintain what has been called the Quebec model, the social safety net that we are so proud of in Quebec and we've seen over the past 2 years perform admirably in horrible, horrible circumstances. The fact is that we have a healthcare system that costs us collectively over $50 billion a year. That's roughly half of Quebec's provincial budget. And no matter what we do or what we say, every year, there will be the expenses, our healthcare expenses will grow by a minimum of 5-6% a year, if not more. This is just to maintain the system as it is. And as we've seen, the system is basically on its knees right now. It's been supported admirably and heroically by our healthcare workers for the past 24 months. But as we know, and as we've seen, the system is very, very fragile. And with what's coming up generationally and what's coming up in the next few years, we have a huge challenge in front of us that is exacerbated by the labor shortage. We simply do not have the nurses, we don't have the doctors, we don't have the support staff to continue to provide the services that we need to provide. And so it's gotten to a point where even the current government, the CAQ government, which when it came in in 2018, remember when it was elected in 2018, one of their promises, and they ran on this, and they were attacking us constantly when I was in government, is that they want less immigration. And they would say in French, on en veut moins, mais on veut en prendre soin. So what they want to say is that, we have too much immigration, and so we need to reduce it so we can better integrate, which was code for, okay, we need less immigration. And also the immigration that we want to bring in, we want to make sure that immigration speaks French. And so the idea here is the fact, and it brings me to another area of my talk today, which is how immigration works in Quebec and in Canada. And it's very complex, but it's still very important to understand that, first of all, we have an immigration system that jurisdictionally is very muddied, because under the Constitution, the federal government is responsible for immigration. But after the failure of Meech Lake in 1990, then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, fearful of mounting nationalism in Quebec and wanting to try to compensate for the failure of that constitutional accord, worked with then Quebec Premier Robert Bourassa and the two immigration ministers. The federal immigration minister was Barbara McDougall, and the provincial Liberal immigration minister was Monique Gagnon-Tremblay. And the two worked out a Canada-Quebec Accord on Immigration in 1991, which gives, and this is administrative, so this was not a constitutional modification, but it was an administrative accord, which gives concretely powers to Quebec in immigration. And that's something that is only in Quebec. Nowhere else in Canada do we have this type of arrangement. And so since 1991, Quebec decides who they select to come to Quebec. So the selection is controlled by the Quebec government. The integration, so the reception, integration is controlled by the government of Quebec. And very importantly, also the number of immigrants every year is controlled by the Quebec government. So, and this targets primarily economic immigration, but the overall number also takes into consideration refugees, asylum seekers, international students, family reunification, which are also part of immigration. But mainly what the Quebec government controls is everything having to do with economic immigration. So I go back to the CAQ government, 2018, running on a platform that included reducing significantly immigration. When I was immigration minister, we had set the quota at 52,000 a year. When they came in, the CAQ brought it down to 40,000 a year. Now, just so you know, right now, as we speak, the two largest business lobbies, business groups in Quebec, le Conseil du patronat du Québec et la Fédération des chambres de commerce du Québec, both advocate to raise that ceiling to over 65,000 a year. This is how important for the business lobbies, the raising and the importance of immigration to maintain economic vigor in Quebec. So they brought it down to 40, but the situation has become so dire that the immigration minister, Jean Boulet, last fall announced that he would temporarily raise the ceiling to actually 52,000, which was the ceiling when I was immigration minister, and also would add another 18,000, which he calls backlog cases, to actually say that now we're going to get 70,000 immigrants this year. So actually, in reality, even if the current CAQ government is saying that it wants to limit immigration and is looking at the other solutions to the labor shortage problem, it has very discreetly and without a lot of fanfare actually put in place measures to try to raise the ceiling, but is not doing it in any way permanently, but understands that economically speaking, if we want to continue to be able to pay for all the government services we have, which includes healthcare and education system, which includes daycare, you name it, well, we're going to need to absolutely invest in immigration. But when we talk about investing in immigration, it's not just about bringing more people in. it's also, what do you do when they are actually here? And what I mean by that is, just think, you need, for example, housing. What do we have in Montreal? What do we have across Quebec? A housing shortage. We don't have enough housing, and we're not even investing, both provincially, municipally, or federally, nearly enough in housing. So we have issues right now where in places like Quebec City, Trois-Rivières, Montreal, of course, where you have companies that actually have to, when they bring in immigrants to fill their positions, are having trouble actually finding housing for them. And actually, we're looking at a situation where actually some companies are looking at building their own housing to make sure that they're able to integrate their new immigrant workforce. Same thing with education and daycare. You know it, you've seen it. The schools are full. We don't have enough teachers. We have schools where actually there's some students already that are learning in trailers, in temporary installations, because the schools aren't big enough to accommodate all the students. So when you have an influx of immigrants, and when we're talking influx, I mean, in certain communities in Quebec, 15 immigrants and their families is a huge deal. So we're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of people. We're talking about just a small number of people can really create an imbalance on housing, on healthcare. These people need transportation. Their families need quickly access to care. So there's a lot of integration services that have to be thought of as well, and a way to regionalize the immigration, because again, this is not just a Montreal-centric problem. Adding to that, because that's not all, we're facing a competition for that workforce. The fact is that we are in a competition for those talents, because we are not the only ones actually facing this issue. So we're in a competition for this workforce with Ontario, with the rest of the other Canadian provinces, with the US. And the fact is right now is that we are not investing nearly enough as a society to be able to face this. And I know it's a tired word because we've been going through this for 2 years, and then Ottawa, and now Ukraine, but this is one of those sleeping crises that we are not paying nearly enough attention to. Because right now, and it's across the political spectrum, you have people like former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney that says that 20, 30 years from now, the population of Canada should be around 65 or 75 million people. We're barely at 36. And the only way to get there is going to be through immigration. And this shouldn't be a shock to anybody, because this is how Canada was built. I mean, today, why do we have 1.4 million Ukrainians? Well, it was through immigration. And if you go to any cemetery across Quebec, all the regions, even though we have a government right now that is extremely nationalist and is positioning itself on immigration as a way to defend the Quebec culture and the French culture, the fact is, if you go across Quebec and the regions and you go into the cemeteries, you will find names that are not Gagnon and are not Tremblay. And the fact is that this province was built by immigrants as well. My own father arrived here as a young child after the Second World War, and arrived where? In Saint-Michel, the riding that I ended up representing many years later. and is still today a place where you have over 80 different nationalities that are there and start off. But the fact is that the way we have mobilized ourselves to face the pandemic and the problems that we have, not, I wouldn't say discovered, but the problems that we have maybe taken a much more important attention to throughout the pandemic. Well, one of those issues is the labor shortage. And the solution, and one of the many, many solutions that we have, but the key solution to the entire problem that we have with labor shortage and all the consequences that it brings is immigration. Now, yes, we have a challenge, and integration is not an easy thing. And it takes governments, it takes municipalities, it takes community groups, it takes the private sector, it takes a mobilization to bring everybody to contribute to successfully integrating immigrants. It's a challenge. It's not easy. But again, the fact is if we are going to continue, and if we want to continue living the way we are used to living as a society and having the services that we are used to from our governments, immigration is going to have to go through a profound transformation. And I'll end on this point. The fact is that we've gotten here because our immigration system, both Quebec's and the federal government, is completely antiquated. It was developed in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, at a time where both in Quebec and the rest of Canada, there was high unemployment. And so the mindset of our system was to put a lot of obstacles to bringing immigration. Because when you have high unemployment in your existing population, the last thing you want to do politically and economically is actually bring even more people in. So our system is very complex, very difficult to understand. In Quebec has 2 layers, which adds to the delays. And it was designed in a way also to limit and to stop and to discourage immigration, and only let in those people that were coming in to fill very specific jobs in very specific key strategic sectors. So we have to transform this. But the problem right now is that there's no political will to do this. And the reason why is that we are so fractioned, we're so divided, and I know that's another tired word, we've heard divided a lot these days. But the fact is, if you look in Canada, we have a government in Ottawa that was elected twice in a row with less than 34% of the popular vote. We have a government in Quebec City, even though they have a majority, a very strong majority, they still were elected with 37.5% of the popular vote. And you have an opposition that is completely divided in Quebec. We have now 4 opposition parties in Quebec that are polling between 10 and 20%. So when you have very, very small margins of victory in these ridings, you know, where you can win a riding with 500 votes or less than 1,000 votes or 100 votes sometimes, issues that are very divisive, like immigration, can make a difference. And right now, there's no political will to get out there and get in front of this, because then it raises the specter of nationalists, and you have the nationalist media, and you have the protection of the French culture that is being used as this sort of shield against any real conversation about immigration. And the key is not bringing less immigrants to better integrate them. No, quite the contrary. the best solution is to invest more in all the ecosystem that is needed to bring in successfully more immigrants. And yes, teach them French. And yes, integrate them into Quebec culture. But we've done this. We've done this before. We've been bringing in immigrants for 400 years in Quebec. And so I'll end on this. You know, when I was immigration minister, I used to say, you know, aside from the First Nations, we're all immigrants. The only difference is the day we got here. And so this is fundamental in so many ways, but we have people right now that are trying to use immigration as a wedge, as a dividing issue, and making it into a problem and a false debate around the preservation of Quebec and French culture. It is not. And so there must be a serious conversation now and a serious debate with no emotion and about the importance of transforming our immigration system in Quebec and in Canada, and also tying it to our future, our social and economic future. Because if we don't do this very, very soon, you will see in the coming years, we will have some horrific choices to make in terms of the type of society we were used to in the last few decades and what we can afford in the decades to come. So Susan, is that all right? I would end with that and be happy to take your questions.
Wonderful. We have 3 queued up. We will start with Sam, and then it will be Rod, followed by Nick. So Sam, screen is yours.
Thank you. It's my chance to give the question you, David. Normally the role is reversed. David has interviewed me a few times on CJAD, so thank you for a great talk, and it's good to connect with you on video today. So preface my question with a little political disclaimer, because at Rotary, as you probably know, we try to be as apolitical as possible, and I thank you for threading that needle today. But I had one which I thought you could comment on, which is going to test out your ability to stay there. Given the stated position of the CAQ with regard to immigration, because they really haven't changed what they've said about it, they've just changed what they're doing about it. Why do you think they've jumped so quickly, quicker than almost anybody else, to say that they want to welcome an unlimited number of Ukrainian refugees? And, you know, we at the mission have a particular interest in that because we're doing some things. Do you think they've suddenly become enlightened, or do you think this is something that they'll reverse again after the next election, or is there some other reason that I'm not seeing?
Well, Sam, great to see you. And yes, we spoke. I invited you on the show on Friday. Always great to talk to you. And I, again, will say it as many times as I can. I admire what you and your team does at the Welcome Hall mission. Here's what I think. I don't think it's been like this statement is a radical shift in the CAQ mindset on immigration. What Jean Boulet, the Minister of Immigration, said is we'll welcome everyone we can according to our capacity. That's the part of the sentence that wasn't repeated very often, because the CAQ always falls back on this. Well, what's our actual capacity to welcome? So we'll welcome everybody that we can actually welcome. So that's the out with a sentence like that. But here's the thing. I remember when you all might remember when the Roxham Road crisis in 2017. I was the immigration minister, and also I was deputy for Viau, so Saint Michel, so the Haitian community. I was working very closely with Haitian community leaders and working on that. You know, in the span of a few months, we welcomed close to 20,000 Haitians at Roxham Road, which is enormous. Remember, we had to open Olympic Stadium. We had them at the old Royal Vic. I mean, it was a huge effort. And so at the time, you had François Legault saying publicly in the National Assembly, asking me questions, asking Premier Couillard questions, saying this is illegal immigration. Him and Jean-François Lisée. And it was not illegal. Asylum seekers were not in this country illegally. Yet the CEQ and the Parti Québécois, Jean-François Lisée, were saying this was illegal immigration. I think that François Legault has learned a few things since then about immigration. And I think he doesn't want to be tagged with not being compassionate and not being humanitarian this time around. Because in 2017 and 2018, this was about compassion and humanitarianism. And I think on this one, he wants to be on side, and he does not want to be accused of slowing down immigration, because in Quebec, like as we did in our government with the Syrians back in 2016, we worked with the federal government and brought Syrian refugees in. And so I really think that it's more about perception and making sure that he's on the right side of history more than a major shift in welcoming thousands and thousands of immigrants to Quebec. And I'll bet you that also what we want to do is be able to select Ukrainians that maybe can fill positions, and there's going to be the language issue, and there's going to be the regionalization issue. But I just think that in terms of just the political aspect of things, he just did not want to be seen as not doing his part in this crisis at this point.
Thank you, David. Our next question is from Rod. Go ahead, Rod.
Thank you, David, for an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
One of my primary volunteer functions is driving the rotary truck to deliver furniture to the Syrian refugees over the past 3 years. It is amazing to me what this government will not recognize in their credentials. I can think of one guy who is a doctor in Syria and practiced in Saudi Arabia. And he said, it's going to take me 2 or 3 years to, quote, qualify in Quebec. And in the meantime, I have to earn a living just to live when I'm doing all this studying. So why will they not move faster to ensure that people with credentials get accepted into the system here?
There are 2 main reasons. That's a very good question. And there are 2 main reasons. One is, and until there's a fundamental shift, there's the whole question of the French language, knowledge of French. That is always used as a way to, let's say, slow down the process, because the way you come in terms of economic immigration, there's literally, it's a questionnaire and you get points. And you have to get to a certain level of points, and knowledge of French gives you a ton of points. But if you don't know French, you don't get those points. And so that's always going to be an issue. The other problem, I gotta say, is here in Quebec, and it has nothing to do with politics. It's more the professional corporations here in Quebec have done a horrible job collectively. There are few exceptions, like the engineers have streamlined the recognition process. But I'll give you an example. I'm an attorney. The Quebec Bar Association, now I will say that I think they've streamlined this, but when I was immigration minister, just to give you an idea, if you were an immigrant lawyer and you wanted to come in and get your credentials recognized by the Quebec Bar to be able to practice, you had to take a few courses, just a few courses, not the full, you didn't have to get a law degree camp, but just a few classes. But the problem is that those courses were given by the bar like every 2 years. So you were like, there was sort of a systemic system to limit. And again, those professional corporations, and there are over 50 of them. And again, I don't want to say that all of them are thinking the same way. I don't want to generalize too much, but most of them in healthcare and in other professions did not want the influx, because more people come in. Well, you have to manage. Okay, first of all, you have to take responsibility for bringing them in terms of evaluating their competency. And then after that, it just brings in more people. So more competition for the existing members. So there's a whole economic, territorial, and also basic ignorance, I think, that is just a structure that has been very difficult to move. I remember I had trouble, with it when I was immigration minister. But again, there are certain corporations, professional corporations, like engineers, for example, because it's important at the same time. If you're an engineer from Algeria, you've never had to build a bridge that has to resist to 40 below weather, right? So there might be certain things that you need to brush up on. But at the same time, is it right that we have an engineer that's been driving a cab for 4 years in the streets of Montreal? No. That just doesn't work for me. And what I'm talking about, I know this is a fact. And this is, so there's a lot of work to do. But again, it goes back to my broader point during my talk. We need a fundamental shift in the way we see immigration, in terms of seeing that this is something that is good and is essential. If we don't start shifting and don't start opening the doors, like we've done as a country for over a century, if we don't do this, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And that's what's tragic about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Our next question is from Nick. Nick, you had your hand up?
Yeah. Thank you so much, David. It's been very interesting and informative. And I say that from the angle of somebody who is an immigrant, albeit from the United States. But I studied here, and then I had to leave because in 2007, unless I had a job offer, there was no way for me to stay. And I waited about 13 years to come back again, and I finally did. But in any case, my question is related a little bit more to what you talked about at the end of your conversation there, which was, the economic motivation for this, and not just about the fact that, that data is there, it speaks for itself, but sort of the communication of that information to the province as a whole, and to people to, if looking at it from a political standpoint, okay, yes, there are emotional aspects of preserving French and the French language and the Quebec culture. And I think that that's a big thing. I speak French fluently now because of the Quebec government, because I took French in university and they were free courses. And so I now work 90% of my time in French. But I think the economic side of things, to overcome those obstacles, that message needs to be more clear, more concise, or somehow get through to people more effectively, that if you want, your young child healthcare programs that cost you virtually nothing, or if you want better healthcare services for everyone. And I guess my question to you is, how do you see, or do you have any thoughts on how that communication can be done more effectively to actually get that across to the everyman here in Quebec, that this is in your benefit. This is not an invasion of undesirables or mauvais immigrants. It's for everybody's benefit that this happens.
Another good question. I think that, again, there's no one simple answer to the issues you just raised. And I'm very mindful, and I've been trying, as Sam pointed out, to toe the line, because I'm not here to be partisan. I'm trying to put it out there the way I see the situation. The fact is that when you have a lot of factors that contribute to this. One In the French media, the French nationalist media is, takes a big chunk. I mean, half of the French media is very nationalist, and so will always look at these issues through the prism of nationalism and preservation of the French culture. There's that. But also, I will say, and I will here be very critical, and I'm being critical here even of my former political party here. I think the other opposition parties have failed in raising this issue. And I think they fear raising the issue. They fear explaining it. And all of the opposition parties, some of them aren't interested in it, but some of them who are, and who have within their base immigrants, and aren't doing as much as they can. And I will say also the private sector. The private sector has been trying to put it out there more and more. But the fact is, and we have to say, especially in the regions, Montreal, we've always dealt with immigration, right? Over 70% of all immigrants that come to Quebec come through Montreal. The second city is Gatineau. Okay, and after that, it's very small numbers that are in other Quebec cities. The fact is that for the last 50 years, our regions have not been used to dealing with immigration. And the fact is that, some people have tried to paint Quebecers in the regions that either racist or xenophobic. And that's not true. I mean, there is racism, there is xenophobia, but there's not a particularly high number of racism and xenophobia in Quebec regions. It's just they don't know. They haven't been confronted to this issue. This is new. This is a new problem. I mean, you had Quebec regions up until a few years ago that were losing people because there were no jobs. And now you have companies in the regions that are actually losing contracts because they don't have people to fill the orders. You have companies, Quebec companies, that are actually opening offices or factories elsewhere in the world to fill the orders that they would be ready and willing to fill in Quebec if they just had the people. And so when you haven't been used to dealing with immigration, you just don't bring in a family and say, hey, welcome, and that's it. That's not the trick. Even for an American, I lived for 5 years in the US and I was Canadian. You have to integrate. It's an adaptation. And imagine, this is the US and Canada. So imagine if you come from another continent, you don't speak the language, you have a completely different background. So it's a two-way conversation. It takes an effort. It takes an effort in the company. It takes an effort with the city. It takes an effort with the integration groups. It takes an effort. It could be a church. It could be, a religious institution. It could be the local community also. Sometimes, there's already a small immigrant community that can also play a role in integration. So there's so many things, the school, the hospital, everything that has to be brought in. So there are success stories. And if I can, I'll just give you an example. There's a small town between Lévis and Saint-Georges-de-Beauce. Okay, you see where I am in Beauce? Okay, Quebec City. You go across the St. Lawrence. You go south. If you continue going south, you'll hit Saint-Georges-de-Beauce. So between Lévis, which is across the river from Quebec City, and Saint-Georges-de-Beauce, there's a small town, a nothing little town called Saint-Anselme. So all the saints, and even saints that aren't saints, have a saint something in Quebec, and Saint-Anselme is there. So you have a company, a major food transformation company called Excel Door. You see them in the supermarket. You may buy their chicken or their whatever, you know, in the supermarket. And so they're a $1 billion company. And they set up a plant in Saint-Anselme, 600 workers, 150 of them come from 30 different nationalities. And it works. Why? Because the company worked with that small town. And we're talking Quebec profond, francophone, not used to seeing 150 people and their families coming from 30 different countries and different religions, different ethnic backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. How did it work? It worked because everybody invested and understood that this was essential for everybody. But it takes a lot of work. It takes opening minds, and it's a conversation. I had a woman when I was minister in Val d'Or. I was holding a town hall in Val d'Or on immigration and the labor shortage. This woman has a business. She raised her hand. I could feel her. Before she raised her hand during my talk, I could sense the stress in her face. You know, you sense when somebody's, you know, not right and something's wrong and she's gonna say something and it's gonna be hard for her. So she finally worked up the nerve to ask me a question. And she said, Mr. Heurtel, I understand everything you're saying and I want to do it and I need immigrant workers, but I heard that if I hire a worker with that practices the Muslim religion, I have to give him 5 bricks a day so he can pray, which is completely not true. She's not a racist. She's not a xenophobe. She's not Islamophobe. She just didn't know. So it's about communication. It's about talking about it. It's about getting it out there. But again, to your point, is that right now we're stuck in this thing where immigration is part of the broader preservation of Quebec culture debate and nationalism. And it's not to say that nationalists are against immigration, but it's part of that debate. Mm-hmm. And the other political parties are afraid because they're so divided and the margins are so tight that they don't want to be seen as, you know, being attacked on or attacking the preservation of Quebec culture argument. And so there's a lot of difficulty here in getting the facts out there and talking about this rationally and understanding that this is actually something that is wanted across the Quebec region. This is not, it's not true to say that Quebecers, Francophone Quebecers are against immigration.
Thank you.
David, this is absolutely fascinating. And before I go to the next 3 people who are queued up to ask you questions, I want to make sure that you have the time.
Yes, I do. I'm happy to be to stay on where. Yeah, sure.
Okay, super. So then we've got Gulsen up next with her question.
Hi, David. Thank you, first of all, for this presentation. And it's really good as a new immigrant hearing you and seeing that there is people who understands and who sees the situation. My question was just like the next, but I want to give a few feedback from my side because, for example, from Turkey, I'm from Turkey. This year, around 80 students attended to McGill University. These are students that are well educated and, how can I say, coming from cultural families. And most of these students wants to stay in Montreal because Montreal is a really good city to live with and they are integrated with the Montreal, not living island Turkish communities. But what I see is last year, almost all of them has to go to other provinces, especially to BC or Ontario because of the jobs and because of the immigration process. So French is the big inhibitor. And my question is, it's the specialty of Quebec and Montreal being French, Francophone. But is there other ways that will be more, how can I say, motivating and positive incentives for these young people, for everybody, to become a French-speaking person? Because what I see is all the, how can I say, incentives are just punishments, or for businesses, for example. I mean, they may incent rather than just give tax incentives. So can it be another point? And what I see is it's not the people that are not welcoming the immigrants. I think it is again the politics that is preventing it.
Well, first of all, a belated welcome to Canada and to Montreal.
Thank you.
And we're fortunate that you chose us, and we have to change our mentality. That the fact that now we actually have to be grateful when people choose Montreal, choose Quebec, and choose Canada, because there is a lot of choice and there's a big competition out there. I'll tell you another story from when I was minister to answer your question. Immigration was a hot button issue when we were in government, and we were under constant attack from the CEQ and the PQ on that. And I did a Quebec tour on immigration for several months, the fall of 2017. So every Monday and every Friday, when the National Assembly was not sitting, I would go into the regions. I covered basically almost all the regions of Quebec, speaking with entrepreneurs, business leaders, elected official, local, municipal elected officials, immigrant communities, and also community groups that specialize in immigration and integration, schools that gave French classes, basically all the key players on immigration throughout Quebec. And we would always, after the smaller meetings, I would always try to do a town hall with all these leaders, right? And sometimes I would have 20, 30, 40 people, 50 people. It was pretty big. And every time I would ask the same questions. And one of those questions was, are you concerned about immigrants coming in, not knowing French, probably speaking English, and that it might take time for them to learn French? Are you concerned about that? Is that a problem for you as Francophones in Quebec? And I can tell you that not once did I hear that that was a problem. Most people was going to say, said, we're speaking French here. They'll learn. They don't have any choice. We'll just integrate them that way. You know, it's like, it's the, I'll push you in the water and you learn to swim doctrine, right? And so the idea here is that there's no fear in the Quebec regions on the question of immigration being a threat to French. The debate is about Montreal, and the politics are about Montreal. And it's about saying, well, Montreal is, the French status of Montreal is threatened. Therefore, this fuels a nationalist argument. And it fuels also the question of making sure that immigration is very restricted and also targeting the knowledge of French before we come in. And so And right now, this is creating a problem. Now, there are other ways of dealing with bringing in immigrants that do not know French and making sure that they do know French. But right now, the way it's structured, and the fact is we're losing out. We're losing out because now it's a competitive environment. And now, because of the two-tiered system, because we have a provincial immigration system, but it's not because the province controls economic immigration that the feds are out of the loop. So right now, we're in a system where you go through the Quebec process, then you still have to get your approval from the feds.
Yes, I did the same. I got first Quebec.
So
and then-
it's actually adding time. So a lot of people, and that's the word is out, you know, in the immigrant community, the immigrant world, that you will get in much faster. And the federal government has been moving very fast now to set up different types of pilot programs, depending on the regions, depending on the jobs, where you can get in as a temporary foreign worker much more quickly in the rest of the country than you can in Quebec. And that's hurting Quebec.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. For the next question, it got answered while you were speaking. So we are going to end with Martin Barry's questions. And Martin, of course, is the reporter from the Westmount Independent. I will again repeat the disclaimer that the club is apolitical, but Martin is welcome to ask whatever question he likes. So Martin, go ahead, please.
Okay, I was just wondering whether David is planning to run in the upcoming election provincially, and how does he see the PLQ as being positioned heading towards that election?
Okay, I'll answer the first part, and then Martin, I'll ask you to repeat that second part. The first, I'm not currently planning to run in the next provincial election.
Okay, and how do you see the PLQ, the Parti libéral du Québec, as being positioned going towards this election?
Well, and again, my answer is as a political analyst. The fact is that the Liberals, quite frankly, and the polls show it, are struggling. I mean, in the last few months, since the fifth wave, the CEQ has shown signs of weakness in the polls. And their support across Quebec has fallen significantly. It was very, very high, and it's still high today, relatively speaking. But satisfaction numbers and voting intent numbers have gone down significantly with the fifth wave. Yet the Liberals have stagnated in all the polls at 20%. While we've seen the rise of the Conservative Party of Quebec at some points, we've seen also Québec Solidaire move up and down, but it shows that there is an electorate out there. You know, with the CEQ at 40%, you hovering around 40%, depending on the polls, you know, that we've seen them anywhere between 38 and 41% in the most recent polls. And if you add up all the opposition parties, you mean you have a sizable portion of the electorate that is looking elsewhere than the CEQ. Now, does that mean that the CEQ is threatened at this point? I don't think so. But the fact is that the Liberals right now seem to be searching, looking for themselves. Dominique Anglade has tried different tacks. You know, the hydrogen thing hasn't gained any traction. Her big reaction to the pandemic and the fifth wave was the creation of a committee that I don't think that's necessarily got a lot of excitement going. The late reaction to Bill 96, finally deciding to vote against Bill 96, alienated a lot of Anglophone and Allophone voters, which is a key core base of the Liberal Party. So there's still a lot of time. You know, the election is less than 7 months. But the fact is that It's going to be interesting to see the recruitment, because you can expect a lot of M&As not running again. A lot of, especially in the West Island. We're hearing a lot of things. Already a few of them have announced, but we're expecting, especially with Jean Charest going to the federal side, we might see a lot of Charest liberals going and trying their hand at the federal side. But it's going to be hard. It's the Liberals are going to have to, I think, get back to kitchen table issues, primarily address the inflation, the impacts of inflation, have to talk about real issues like immigration, have to talk about real issues like fundamental rights and individual rights. I mean, take, for example, the whole thing with Dawson College. I mean, the whole thing with CEGEPs. I mean, you have a lot of Francophones across Quebec that want to send their kids to English CEGEPs. This is not an Anglo thing. That's one of the reasons why the CAQ backed away from applying Bill 96 to CEGEPs was the fact that this was an issue amongst Francophones. And so the idea here is that I think there's going to have to be a lot of work done on the Liberal side to start gaining some traction. There's going to be a big challenge in the coming weeks and months, because, for example, you're going to have a lot of Liberal organizers and politicos that are going to go and help Jean Charest in his federal run. So especially, so because the conservative leadership is in September, the convention's in September, and our election is early October. So the Liberals are going to lose some people. It's not like the Liberals started off with a deep bench. So you're going to have a lot of organizers and staff that are going to go work on Jean Charest's campaign. That's not going to help. And second of all, it's going to be a real challenge to recruit quality candidates, even if you have relatively safe seats to offer. So it's a big challenge. I think the Liberals really need to step it up. Does that answer your question, Martin?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Lovely, wonderful. David, before I pass the pleasure of thanking you on to Sam Watts, I want to say thank you on behalf of the club. This is fascinating. Your passion shines through, and you're stuck now because we want you back. Okay, Sam, screen is yours.
Well, thank you, David. You've touched on a lot of your answers were very profound, and you've touched on a lot of things, from the labor shortage in Quebec, which is a reality that we're going to have to face, the fact that we have a housing crisis, and you talked about the demographics and the shifting demographics, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people either don't want to talk about or just don't talk about. And also, one of my favorite topics is investing in the ecosystem. And you know how you and I have chatted about that, because it's so necessary for us to start doing things that we need to do in 2022, as opposed to just accepting what was designed for us in the 1970s and 80s. And you've also identified a number of things that I refer to all the time as false choices. Often in the political spectrum and in the world where I work, which touches on the political, we're offered an either or, and we don't really have to choose either one of those. And often they're presented as two bad options. Well, I think you elevated that. So thank you for the way in which you shone the light on a whole bunch of issues today. And we certainly look forward to having you back here again at Rotary. And I look forward to being on CJAD with you again sometime near real soon, because you put together a great show when you're doing it. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you, Sam and Susan, the whole team, and all of you. It's always a pleasure to chat. And this is a very interesting discussion. It was a big topic, so I did my best to hit as many things that I could in a very limited period of time, but I always enjoy these things. And I'll be filling in for Elias next week, all next week. So 9 to noon on CJAD.
Okay, thank you, David. We are not going to keep you any longer. You've been extremely generous with your time. And we will not be offended if you have to sign off, and we'll move on to our announcements.
All right,
So
thank you.
you.